Give It to Carly is a really unusual piece of music for me, and quite playfully it takes me to kind of a new space musically. Like, I think if you listen to it and no one told you who the track was by, you wouldn't necessarily think that that was a Nick Mulvey track. And that's kind of what I love about it, and what I was enjoying about it in the studio when we made it. And it started with this session in February 2016 in South London with Dan Carey. And I had this baritone ukulele, and I was just strumming this kind of pattern that was quite kind of almost aggressive, quite dark. And Dan picked up his bass guitar, and we just locked in, and he'd obviously hit record already, and we recorded this very free form, probably 11-12 minutes or something of this kind of jam. And we liked it, and we started adding layers, and as you add layers you then also start cutting in some structure and editing this recording we had, so it started to have some structure. And we found that it's a very kind of like drone based piece, and all kind of fixes around one chord, and that I wanted a change in the middle. My ears started to ask for a kind of like a development to the piece of music, for it to go somewhere else, so therefore we can come back to where it originally was, and that would probably be our structure. Now, at that time I had a dear friend of mine called Federico Bruno, who's a musician who was involved in my album, and he was really crazy about this ancient sacred piece of music called the Stabat Mater, which is, for classical music heads, you'd know that piece of music, and it's a sacred text from the Bible put to music, and all the great composers have had a stab at it. And in fact, even up to the modern day, because Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead was obsessed with this piece of music, and his studies of the harmonic movement and melodic movement of the Stabat Mater supposedly gave rise to Paranoid Android on Radiohead's OK Computer. So that kind of, if you're a musician, you can think of that song and it's the Rain Down on Me end section of Paranoid Android. So if you think the middle section of Give It to Carly sounds like the Rain Down on Me section of Paranoid Android, that's because somewhere at the root of it, all of us, I group myself here along with Johnny and my friend Federico, were all studying this ancient piece of classical music called the Stabat Mater. Now, we had this instrumental piece of music that was very droney, quite aggressive, quite dark, then moves to this more chromatic section and then comes back to the drone, and everything I tried to do vocally on top of it didn't seem to really fit. Like, the piece of music was such a different flavour from what I normally do that my normal approaches vocally weren't really working, and the song was asking me for something different. So I tried a few things, and then eventually decided to play around with some samples, adding in recorded text or spoken words from other places, and then that is of course what we ended up using in Give It to Carly. And I had recently, before this recording was happening, heard a specific recording from a teacher that I love called Ram Dass, and he's a teacher from America. He's an American guy. Ram Dass, very famous, RAMDASS, Google him, but his story is absolutely fantastic. He's very much at the nucleus of the counterculture in the 1960s, a Harvard professor who went off to explore psychedelics, and in the end followed his journey to India, where he met a guru, and lots of these things that we kind of take for granted as part of the tapestry of culture and spirituality. He was really living at the forefront of back in the 60s, and how a lot of this Eastern wisdom has become available globally. And Ram Dass is a teacher, a hypnotically good speaker and superhero of mine. Big influence on me as a person and as an artist, and his influence, if you can kind of, you're aware of it, you'd feel it all the way through my album Wake Up Now. And his influence, I suppose, developed one stage further on this song, Give It to Carly, because I went and found the particular YouTube of him talking that I'd heard recently. I got the engineer in the studio to just plug in the auxiliary cable into the speakers without telling my producer Dan, because I wanted to get his freshest reaction to it, and I just said, let's press play on both the track and the YouTube and just see what happens. And I'll never forget the look on Dan's face as he heard the two combine, and this sense of like, hang on a second, this really works. So it's a new experience for me. It's a new experiment for me. And Ram Dass is of course talking about something very specific. He's talking about kind of devices to help people let go of emotion and let go of trapped feelings. And it's a technique and a device that comes from the Vedic culture of India, from the Hindu spiritual tradition, where you referring to the goddess Kali. And I'm not fully an expert on Hindu theology, but I gather that Kali is the mother who wishes to consume all of your impurities. She's kind of depicted in often quite dark and kind of frightening ways, you know, like with many arms holding a head of the severed head of Shiva and a blade in the other hand. But she's fully understood when you know that she is a profoundly benevolent presence. And her kind of her wish to destroy is one of transmutation and ultimately clearing and cleaning those who wish to take their problems to her. So Ram Dass is really talking about that, and the energy of which he talks about that kind of stuff really matched the track.